The first gunshot split the night like lightning striking an old oak, sending Zachariah Blackett into a crouch beside his stallion. He'd been trailing a herd for 3 days straight, and this little valley tucked into the Colorado foothills near La Veta was supposed to be his peaceful camp for the night. Instead, the distant ridgeline glowed with an unnatural light, flames licking at the darkness, illuminating the rolling clouds of smoke. "Easy, Thunder," Zach murmured, patting the nervous horse's neck as he squinted at the distant homestead. Even from half a mile away, he could tell the fire was consuming everything in its path. The second gunshot decided that someone was in trouble. Swinging into the saddle, he urged Thunder forward, galloping across the darkened prairie toward the blaze. The spring of 1878 had been unusually dry across Colorado territory, and the wooden homestead went up like kindling, flames reaching hungrily into the night sky. As he approached, the heat struck his face like an open furnace, and he had to shield his eyes against the brightness. That's when he saw her, a figure crawling painfully away from the inferno, dragging herself through the dirt with trembling arms. Her dress was singed, hair disheveled and face blackened by soot. Zachariah dismounted in one fluid motion, rushing to her side and dropping to his knees. "Madam." "Can you hear me?" She looked up, eyes wide with terror and pain, struggling to focus on his face. Blood trickled from a gash along her hairline, and her breath came in ragged gasps. They took everything," she managed before a coughing fit seized her. "You're alive," Zach said firmly, already assessing her injuries. "That's what matters." He glanced back at the burning homestead, the roof collapsing inward with a terrible groan. "Can you stand?" she tried and failed, wincing as she clutched her side. Zach didn't hesitate, gathering her into his arms as gently as possible. She was light, too light, and trembling like autumn leaves in a strong wind. Up close, beneath the soot and blood, he could see she was young, perhaps 25, with features that might have been beautiful before terror and pain had etched themselves onto her face. "I've got you," he promised, carrying her to Thunder. "What's your name?" "Lorelai," she whispered. "Lorelai Evans. I'm Zachariah Blackett. We need to get you somewhere safe, Miss Evans." As he helped her onto his horse, 3 riders appeared on the ridge above the burning homestead, silhouetted against the flames. Zach's hand instinctively moved to his revolver. "They're coming back," Lorelai gasped, clutching his arm with surprising strength. "Please." Zach didn't need to be told twice. He swung up behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist as he turned Thunder away from the burning homestead. "Hold on," he urged, feeling her sag against him as consciousness began to slip away. "Stay with me, Lorelai." He spurred Thunder into a gallop, heading for the cover of a nearby cottonwood grove. Behind them, shouts and the thunder of pursuing hooves grew louder. Zach knew these foothills better than most. He'd spent 2 seasons driving cattle through these valleys, and he steered Thunder toward a narrow ravine that would be difficult to navigate in the dark for anyone who didn't know it was there. The cool night air whipped past them as they rode, Lorelai's breathing shallow against his chest. She was fading fast, but Zach couldn't stop, not with those men behind them. La Veta was too far, 15 miles at least, but there was an old trapper's cabin about 3 miles ahead where they might find shelter. "Almost there," he promised, though he wasn't sure she could hear him anymore. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her body completely limp now. Zach urged Thunder faster, fear clutching at his heart. He'd seen too many good people die out here in this unforgiving wilderness. Not her. Not tonight. The cabin appeared exactly where he remembered, nestled against a rocky hillside, nearly invisible in the darkness. Zach slid from the saddle, carefully bringing Lorelai down with him. She stirred slightly, moaning in pain. "Stay with me," he urged, kicking open the cabin door and carrying her inside. The cabin was cold and musty from disuse, but it had 4 walls, a roof, and a stone fireplace. Zach laid Lorelai gently on the single cot in the corner, then moved quickly to block the door with the cabin's only table. Outside, thunder whinnied softly, and Zach hurried to the single grimy window, peering out at the darkness. The riders hadn't followed them into the ravine. At least, not yet. Returning to Lorelai's side, Zach struck a match and lit the stub of candle he found on a shelf. In the flickering light, he got his first good look at her. Dark hair fell in tangled waves around a face that, despite the soot and blood, was undeniably beautiful. Her simple calico dress was torn and burned in places, revealing angry red skin beneath. "Lorelai," he said softly, touching her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of summer skies. "Water," she whispered. Zach grabbed his canteen and gently lifted her head, helping her take small sips. "Slow now," he cautioned. "What happened back there?" She coughed, wincing as the movement jarred whatever injury she had sustained to her side. "Raiders," she managed. "They came, just after sunset." Father tried to stop them. Her voice broke, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "Your father was with you at the homestead," she nodded, fresh grief washing over her face. "They shot him. I tried to pull him out when they set the fire, but—" "Don't talk anymore," Zach said gently, seeing how each word cost her. "Rest now. I need to look at your injuries." He worked methodically, using water from his canteen to clean the worst of the soot from her face and hands. The gash on her forehead wasn't as bad as he'd feared, but her breathing worried him, shallow and pained. When he gently probed her side, she gasped sharply. "Broken ribs, I reckon," he said grimly. "Maybe worse inside. We need to get you to a doctor." "Lavetta," she whispered. "Doc Wilson." "I know him," Zach confirmed. "But it's too dangerous to move you tonight. Those men might still be searching. We'll wait till morning." He built a small fire in the fireplace, careful to keep it low so the smoke wouldn't give away their location. As warmth slowly filled the cabin, he returned to Lorelai's side with a strip of cloth he'd torn from his spare shirt, dipping it in cool water. "This might help the burns," he said, gently placing it on her forearm where the dress had burned away. She flinched slightly, then relaxed as the cool cloth soothed the angry skin. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Zach paused, surprised by the question. "What kind of man would I be if I rode past someone in trouble?" "The usual kind," she replied with a hint of bitterness that suggested she knew exactly how cruel the world could be. He shook his head, wringing out the cloth and moving to another burn. "I'm not that kind of man, Miss Evans." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Lorelai," she corrected. "I think pulling someone from a fire earns you the right to use their given name." "Lorelai," he agreed, and somehow the sound of it felt right on his tongue. "You should try to sleep if you can. Tomorrow will be difficult." She nodded, her eyes already drifting closed from exhaustion and pain. Zach watched her for a moment, struck by the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this valley on this particular night. He'd planned to be in Denver by the end of the week, looking for work with one of the big cattle outfits. Now those plans seemed trivial compared to getting this woman safely to Lavetta. He settled himself on the floor near the fire, his revolver close at hand, prepared for a long night of keeping watch. Outside, an owl called softly into the darkness, and somewhere distant, a coyote answered. The familiar sounds of the night should have been comforting, but Zach couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed in his life, that by pulling Lorelai Evans from that fire, he had stepped onto a path from which there would be no turning back. Dawn broke with tentative fingers of light creeping through the cabin's single window. Zach had dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, but the night had passed without incident. He rose stiffly, stretching muscles cramped from the hard floor, and checked on Lorelai. She was feverish, her skin hot to the touch, her breathing more labored than the night before. This wasn't good. Internal injuries often worsened with time. They needed to reach Lavetta and Doc Wilson as soon as possible. "Lorelai," he called softly, touching her shoulder. "We need to go now." Her eyes opened, clouded with pain but aware. "I heard horses," she murmured. "During the night." Zach nodded grimly. "They were searching, but they didn't find this place. Still, we shouldn't linger." He helped her sit up, wincing at her stifled cry of pain. "I'm sorry," he said, supporting her weight, "but we need to get you on the horse." She nodded, gathering her strength. "I can ride," she insisted. "I've been riding since before I could walk." Zach managed a smile. "Colorado born and raised, Missouri originally," she corrected. "Father brought me west after Mother died, said there was nothing left for us back east." A shadow crossed her face. "I suppose there's nothing left for me here now either." Zach didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply offered his arm for support as she stood. She swayed dangerously, and he caught her against his chest, feeling her sharp intake of breath at the sudden movement. "Sorry," he murmured, steadying her. "Not your fault," she replied, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I just need a moment." He could feel her gathering her strength, forcing herself to stand straighter despite the pain. There was a core of steel in this woman that impressed him. He'd seen grown men crumble under less. "Let's get you to that doctor," he said, guiding her slowly toward the door. Outside, thunder waited patiently, nickering softly as they emerged from the cabin. The morning was cool and clear, the sky a brilliant Colorado blue that matched Lorelai's eyes. Zach helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist. "Tell me if we need to stop," he said, gathering the reins. She nodded, leaning back slightly against his chest for support. "Just get me to Lavetta. I'll be fine." The ride was slow and cautious. Zach took a circuitous route, avoiding open ground where they might be spotted. Lorelai remained silent for most of the journey, conserving her strength, occasionally guiding him with a soft-spoken direction when he was unsure of the quickest path to town. By mid-morning, they crested a ridge that offered a view of Lavetta nestled in its mountain valley. The small settlement looked peaceful from a distance, a cluster of buildings, mostly wooden, with a church steeple rising above the rest. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, and even from here, Zach could make out the movement of people going about their business. "Almost there," he said, feeling Lorelai's head drop against his shoulder. She was fading fast. "Stay with me, Lorelai." "I'm still here," she whispered, but her voice was weaker than before. They rode directly to Doc Wilson's office, a small whitewashed building at the edge of town. Zach dismounted quickly, then lifted Lorelai from the saddle. She was barely conscious now, her skin burning with fever. He kicked at the door with his boot, his arms full of the injured woman. "Doc Wilson," he shouted, "need help here." The door swung open almost immediately, revealing a tall, thin man with spectacles and a shock of white hair. His eyes widened at the sight of them. "Lorelai Evans," he exclaimed, stepping back to let them enter. "What in God's name happened?" "Raiders hit her homestead last night," Zach explained, carrying her to the examination table the doctor indicated. "Killed her father and burned everything. She's got burns, broken ribs, and I'm worried about internal bleeding." Doc Wilson was already moving, gathering supplies and cutting away the ruined dress to examine Lorelai's injuries. "You did right bringing her here," he said grimly. "She's in a bad way." Zach stepped back, suddenly feeling useless as the doctor worked. "Will she be all right?" The doctor didn't look up. Too soon to tell, you her husband? No, just happened to be riding by. Now the doctor did look up, assessing Zach with shrewd eyes. Good thing you were, she'd be dead otherwise. He returned his attention to Lorelai. I need to operate, you can wait outside. Zach hesitated, strangely reluctant to leave. She's got no one else, he said. Her father's dead and I don't know if she has other family. She doesn't, Wilson confirmed. Joseph Evans was all she had in the world. He paused in his work. Are you planning to stay in La Veta? I wasn't, Zach admitted. Was heading to Denver. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. Well, she'll need someone when she wakes, if she wakes. The words hit Zach like a physical blow. He looked at Lorelai's pale face, remembering her determination, her strength even in the midst of unimaginable loss. The thought of her dying seemed wrong, somehow a light extinguished before its time. I'll be here, he found himself saying. When she wakes. Doc Wilson nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. Sheriff's office is 2 doors down. You might want to report what happened while I work. Zach took one last look at Lorelai, then headed for the door. I'll be back, he promised, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. Outside, the bright spring sunshine seemed at odds with the gravity of what had happened. Zach stood for a moment, getting his bearings. La Veta was small but bustling, with wagons moving along the main street and people going about their business. No one seemed aware that just miles away, a family had been destroyed in the night. The sheriff's office was easy to find. A sturdy building with the word sheriff painted in bold letters above the door. Zach entered to find a weathered man of about 50 sitting behind a desk, his badge gleaming against his dark vest. Help you? The man asked, looking up from his paperwork. Name's Zachariah Blackett, Zach introduced himself. I found Lorelai Evans crawling away from her burning homestead last night. Raiders hit the place, killed her father. The sheriff was instantly alert, rising to his feet. The Evans place, out by Cachara Creek. At Zach's nod, he swore under his breath. Joseph Evans is dead. According to Miss Evans, yes. I didn't see the body. The house was fully engulfed when I arrived. Where is she now? Doc Wilson's. She's in bad shape. The sheriff reached for his hat. I'm Sheriff Thomas Wyatt. I've been tracking a band of raiders for 2 weeks now. They've hit 3 other homesteads in the territory. He studied Zach carefully. You say you just happened upon Miss Evans. I was making camp in the valley when I saw the fire and heard gunshots, Zach explained. You see any of these raiders? Just shadows against the flames. 3 riders on the ridge. Sheriff Wyatt nodded grimly. That fits the pattern. A small group striking isolated homesteads, taking what they can carry and burning the rest. He strapped on his gun belt. I need to gather some men and ride out there. I can show you the place, Zach offered. The sheriff considered him for a moment. You a cowboy, drifter? Been working cattle drives mostly. Was heading to Denver to sign on with one of the big outfits for the summer season. You handy with that gun? Wyatt nodded toward the revolver on Zach's hip. Handy enough. The sheriff seemed to make up his mind. I could use an extra man who knows where the Evans place is. These raiders need to be stopped before they hit another family. Zach thought of Lorelai, lying in Doc Wilson's surgery, fighting for her life. I told her I'd be there when she wakes up. If we're lucky, we'll be back by nightfall, Wyatt said. And she'll have a better chance of healing knowing the men who killed her father are brought to justice. Zach couldn't argue with that logic. All right, let me check on her first, then I'll ride with you. The sheriff nodded. I'll gather some men. Meet us here in 20 minutes. Zach returned to the doctor's office, pausing outside the door when he heard moaning from within. He steeled himself, then entered to find Doc Wilson bent over Lorelai, his hands bloody as he worked. How is she? Zach asked quietly. Wilson glanced up briefly. Still with us. The ribs punctured something inside, but I've got the bleeding under control. Burns aren't as bad as they could be. He returned his focus to his work. She's strong. Good chance she'll pull through. Zach approached the table, looking down at Lorelai's face. Even unconscious, lines of pain creased her forehead. I'm riding with the sheriff to her homestead, he told the doctor. To track the men who did this. Will you tell her? Tell her I'll be back. Wilson nodded without looking up. Be careful out there. These raiders don't leave witnesses. They left one this time, Zach said grimly. That might be their undoing. He left the doctor's office and headed back to where he'd tied Thunder. The horse had been pushed hard and deserved rest, but there was no time. Just a little more, old friend, Zach murmured, patting the stallion's neck. At the sheriff's office, he found Wyatt with 4 other men, all mounted and ready. They were a hard-looking bunch, the kind of men who knew the territory and how to handle themselves in trouble. This is Blackett, the sheriff introduced him. He found Miss Evans and knows where the Evans homestead is. To Zach, he added, these men are deputies Jackson and Cooper, and these 2 are brothers, Luke and Matthew Reed. They run the livery. Zach nodded to each man in turn. The Reed brothers were nearly identical, both sandy-haired and broad-shouldered. The deputies were a study in contrasts, Jackson young and eager, Cooper older with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen too much. Let's ride, Wyatt said. Blackett, you lead the way. They rode hard, following Zach's directions back to the secluded valley where the Evans homestead stood. As they crested the final ridge, Zach saw that the house was nothing but charred ruins now, wisps of smoke still rising from the blackened timbers. The sight reminded him forcefully of Lorelai crawling away from the inferno, and his resolve hardened. There, he pointed. That's where I found her, dragging herself away from the fire. Sheriff Wyatt dismounted, examining the ground. Tracks here, he called. At least 3 horses, maybe 4. The deputies and the Reed brothers spread out, searching the area methodically. Zach stayed with the sheriff, following the tracks that led away from the homestead. They headed east, Wyatt observed, toward the foothills. Luke Reed approached, his expression grim. Found Joseph Evans, he reported. What's left of him? Shot twice and left to burn in the barn. Zach winced, thinking of what this news would do to Lorelai when she learned of it. Wyatt merely nodded as if this confirmation was exactly what he'd expected. Any sign of what they took? The sheriff asked. Looks like they loaded up wagons, Cooper called from near what had been the main house. Furniture, supplies, anything of value. These aren't just killers, Wyatt said quietly to Zach. They're scavengers. They hit isolated homesteads, take what they can sell, and leave no witnesses. Except Lorelai, Zach pointed out, which means they'll be looking for her, Wyatt replied grimly, when they realize someone survived to identify them. The thought sent a chill through Zach. He hadn't considered that the raiders might come back to finish what they'd started. We need to find them first. We will, Wyatt assured him, studying the tracks. They're heading for the mountains. There's an old mining camp up there abandoned last year when the silver played out. Been rumors of squatters using it. How far? Half-day's ride if we push hard. Zach glanced at the sun, already past its zenith. Then we'd better get moving. They buried Joseph Evans as best they could, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross. Zach found himself saying a silent prayer for the man he'd never met, the father whose daughter now lay fighting for her life in Lavetta. As they mounted up to follow the raiders' trail, Matthew Reed pulled alongside Zach. You sweet on the Evans girl? He asked bluntly. Zach was taken aback by the question. Hardly know her. Reed studied him thoughtfully. Known her since she was 16. Pretty thing. Turned down half the eligible men in Lavetta County. I'm just making sure she gets justice, Zach said firmly. Reed shrugged. Just saying. She'll need someone now, with her pa gone and the homestead destroyed. Before Zach could respond, Sheriff Wyatt called for them to move out. The conversation left him unsettled, though. What would happen to Lorelai once this was over? Where would she go? The questions nagged at him as they rode into the foothills, following the clear trail left by the raiders. The tracks led them higher into the mountains, through stands of pine and aspen. The going was slower here, the trail steeper and more treacherous. By late afternoon, they were deep in the foothills, approaching a narrow valley tucked between two rocky ridges. Wyatt held up his hand, signaling them to stop. "Mining camp's just around that bend," he said quietly. "We'll approach on foot from here. Leave the horses with Matthew." They dismounted, checking their weapons. Zach felt a familiar tension in his gut, the feeling that had preceded every dangerous situation he'd ever faced. He wasn't a gunfighter by trade, but he'd had his share of tight spots driving cattle through hostile territory. "If it's them," Wyatt instructed, "we try to take them alive. I want to know if there are more of them out there." The men nodded their understanding. Matthew stayed with the horses while the rest of them moved forward cautiously, keeping to the cover of the trees. As they rounded the bend, the old mining camp came into view, a collection of ramshackle buildings nestled against the mountainside, with the dark mouth of a mine shaft visible behind them. Smoke rose from the chimney of the largest building, confirming Wyatt's suspicion that someone was using the abandoned camp. 3 horses were tethered outside and a loaded wagon stood nearby. "That's them," Cooper whispered. "Recognize that pinto. Seen it in town last week." Wyatt nodded grimly. "Jackson, circle around to the back of the camp. Luke, cover the mine entrance in case they try to bolt that way. Cooper, you're with me. Blackett, stay here and make sure none of them slip past us." Zach took up position behind a large boulder that afforded him a clear view of the camp and the path leading away from it. The others moved into position with practiced efficiency, surrounding the camp before the raiders had any inkling they were there. When everyone was in place, Sheriff Wyatt stepped into the open, his rifle raised. "This is Sheriff Wyatt," he shouted. "Come out with your hands up." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door of the main building burst open and a man emerged, firing wildly. Wyatt dropped to one knee, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The raider fell, clutching his shoulder. 2 more men burst from the side of the building, making a run for the horses. Zach took aim at the nearest one, a burly man with a wild beard. "Stop right there," he commanded. The man whirled, raising his pistol. Zach fired first, his bullet catching the raider in the leg. The man went down hard, his gun flying from his hand. The third raider managed to reach his horse, swinging into the saddle and spurring the animal forward directly toward Zach's position. Zach stood his ground, aiming carefully. He fired once, then again. The second shot struck home and the rider tumbled from the saddle, landing in a heap on the rocky ground. In less than a minute, it was over. All 3 raiders were down, wounded but alive. Sheriff Wyatt and his men moved in quickly, disarming the injured men and binding their wounds as best they could. "Anyone else up here?" Wyatt demanded of the first man, who appeared to be the leader. "Just us," the man growled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You hit the Evans place last night," Wyatt said. It wasn't a question. The man spat on the ground. "Don't know what you're talking about." Wyatt nodded to Cooper, who pulled the wagon tarp back to reveal furniture and household goods that must have come from the Evans homestead. "Want to try again?" The raider glared but said nothing. Zach approached, anger building in his chest as he thought of Lorelai's pain, her father's death. "You left a witness," he said coldly. "The woman survived. A flicker of surprise crossed the raider's face before he could hide it. "That's a lie," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "No one got out of that fire. She's alive," Zach insisted, "and she'll testify against you." The man cursed, then looked to his companions. One was unconscious from blood loss, the other staring sullenly at the ground. "We're just trying to survive," he muttered. "Times are hard." "So you murder innocent people and burn their homes." Zach felt his hand tightening on his gun, and he had to force himself to relax his grip. "You left a young woman with nothing, her father dead, her home destroyed." "Enough, Blackett," Sheriff Wyatt intervened. "They'll face justice in La Veta. Help Cooper get them loaded in their own wagon. We'll use it to transport them back to town." It took nearly an hour to get the wounded raiders secured in the wagon. By then, twilight was deepening into night, and Wyatt made the decision to make camp and start back at first light. "No sense risking the horses on these trails in the dark," he explained. "We'll use their camp for the night." They took shifts keeping watch over the prisoners. Zach volunteered for the first watch, sitting outside the building where the raiders were secured, his thoughts turning inevitably to Lorelai. Was she still alive? Had she woken? Was she wondering where he was? He'd made her a promise to be there when she woke, and here he was, miles away in the mountains. But he was also ensuring that the men who had destroyed her life would face justice. He hoped she would understand. When Luke Reed came to relieve him near midnight, Zach found a corner of the bunkhouse to stretch out in. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams filled with images of fire and a woman crawling through the ashes of her life. They set out at dawn, the wagon moving slowly over the rough mountain trails. The injured raiders were sullen but cooperative, perhaps realizing that their best hope now lay in the mercy of the court. By midday, they had descended from the foothills and could see La Veta in the distance. "Go on ahead," Sheriff Wyatt told Zach as they approached the town. "Check on Miss Evans. We can handle these three." Zach needed no further encouragement. He spurred Thunder forward, galloping the last mile into town and straight to Doc Wilson's office. His heart was pounding as he dismounted and rushed to the door. The doctor looked up from his desk as Zach entered, a faint smile crossing his tired face. "I was wondering when you'd be back," he said. "How is she?" Zach asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Alive," Wilson replied. "Fever broke last night. She's been asking for you." Relief washed through Zach like a cool mountain stream. "Can I see her?" Wilson nodded, gesturing toward a door at the back of the office. "She's weak but alert. Don't tire her out." Zach moved to the door, suddenly hesitant. What would he say to her? How could he tell her about finding her father's body? He took a deep breath and entered the small recovery room. Lorelai lay in a narrow bed, her face pale against the white pillow. Her dark hair had been washed and combed, spreading across the pillow in waves. The gash on her forehead was neatly stitched, and clean bandages were visible at the edges of her nightgown. Her eyes opened as he approached those remarkable blue eyes that had haunted his thoughts for 2 days now. Recognition flickered, followed by relief. "Zachariah," she whispered. "You came back." "I promised I would," he replied, pulling a chair to her bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of buffalo," she admitted with a weak smile. "But alive thanks to you." "Doc Wilson did the hard work," Zach demurred. "He told me you brought me all the way from the homestead." Her voice caught. "He also told me about my father." Zach reached for her hand, surprised at how natural it felt to take it in his. "I'm sorry, Lorelai, we buried him properly. The sheriff marked the grave." A tear slid down her cheek. "What am I going to do now?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Everything's gone. Everyone's gone." "Not everything," Zach said firmly, "and not everyone. You're still here." She looked at him with those bottomless blue eyes. Why do you care what happens to me? You don't even know me." It was a fair question, one Zach had been asking himself. "I don't know," he admitted. "But from the moment I found you crawling from that fire, I just couldn't walk away." She studied his face as if searching for something. "Sheriff Wyatt came by earlier. Said you rode with him to find the raiders." Zach nodded. "We caught them. They're in custody now. We're there. 3 of them." "Yes. Did you see them?" She closed her eyes briefly. "I'll never forget their faces, especially the leader, the one who shot my father." "You'll have to testify at their trial," Zach said gently. "I know." Her hand tightened on his. "Will you stay?" Until then, the question caught him off guard. His plans to head to Denver suddenly seemed distant and unimportant. "I'll stay," he found himself saying. "As long as you need me to." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't think I could face this alone." Doc Wilson entered then, carrying a tray with a bowl of broth. "That's enough visiting for now," he said firmly. "Miss Evans needs to eat and rest." Zach stood, reluctant to leave but understanding the doctor's concerns. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised Lorelai. She nodded, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. "Tomorrow," she echoed. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on Zach's face as he stood on the doctor's porch, considering his next move. He needed lodging if he was going to stay in Lavetta, and Thunder needed proper care after the hard riding of the past few days. He headed for the livery stable, where he found Matthew Reed brushing down one of the sheriff's horses. "Heard you boys caught those raiders," Matthew said by way of greeting. "Good work." "Thanks," Zach replied. "Need to board my horse for a few days, and I could use a recommendation for lodging." Matthew looked up, a knowing smile on his face. "Staying in town, are you? Miss Evans must be doing better." Zach ignored the implication. "She's awake, still weak, but the doctor thinks she'll recover." "Good news," Matthew nodded. "As for lodging, Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house at the end of Main Street. Clean rooms, fair prices, and the best cooking in town." "Appreciate it," Zach said, handing over Thunder's reins. "Take good care of him. He's earned his rest." "Will do," Matthew promised. "Say if you're looking for work while you're here, Clarence Miller's been looking for help at his ranch. Lost 2 hands to gold fever last month." Zach considered this. He'd need money if he was going to stay in Lavetta for any length of time. "I might look into that. Where's Miller's place?" 5 miles west of town. Can't miss it, biggest spread in the county." Zach nodded his thanks and headed toward the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a cheerful widow in her 50s who was delighted to have a new boarder. "Room at the top of the stairs," she told him after he'd paid for a week in advance. "Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. Don't be late or you'll go hungry." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the main street. Zach set down his meager belongings and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. He hadn't planned any of this, finding Lorelai, chasing raiders, staying in Lavetta. His life had always been one of movement, of never settling too long in one place. Yet here he was, making promises to a woman he barely knew, contemplating taking work at a local ranch. It should have felt wrong, like a trap closing around him. Instead, it felt strangely right, as if he'd been wandering aimlessly until fate had brought him to that burning homestead and the woman crawling from the flames. The next morning, Zach woke early, had breakfast at Mrs. Patterson's table, then headed straight to Doc Wilson's office. He found the doctor examining Lorelai's bandages, her face tight with pain as he checked her ribs. "Healing well," Wilson pronounced. "Another week of rest and you'll be able to move around a bit." "A week," Lorelai protested. "What am I supposed to do for a week?" "Rest," the doctor said firmly. "You had a punctured lung, Miss Evans. It's a miracle you're alive at all." She subsided, noticing Zach standing in the doorway. Her expression brightened immediately. "Zachariah." "Morning," he greeted, stepping into the room as the doctor gathered his supplies. "You look better today." It was true some color had returned to her cheeks and her eyes were clearer. "I feel better," she admitted, "though apparently I'm confined to this bed for another week." "Doctor's orders," Wilson said over his shoulder as he left the room. Zach took the chair beside her bed. "A week isn't so long. It is when you have nowhere to go afterward," she said quietly. "The doctor says I can't return to the homestead, not that there's anything to return to." "We'll figure something out," Zach assured her. "One day at a time." She studied him curiously. "Why are you still here, Zachariah? You must have had plans before you found me." "I was heading to Denver," he admitted, "looking for work with one of the cattle outfits. And now I'm here," he said simply. "Matthew Reed mentioned that a rancher named Miller is looking for hands." She nodded. "Clarence Miller, good man, fair employer. My father did business with him occasionally." Her expression clouded at the mention of her father. "It still doesn't feel real, you know, that he's gone." Zach reached for her hand, which was becoming a habit he couldn't seem to break. "I know." They sat in companionable silence for a while, Zach tracing small circles on the back of her hand with his thumb. Finally, she spoke again. "Tell me about yourself, Zachariah Blackett. If you're going to be my self-appointed guardian, I should know something about you." He smiled at that. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Texas. Father had a small ranch until the war took everything. Been on my own since I was 16, mostly working cattle drives." "No family, none living," he said, the old pain a dull echo now. "Lost my mother to fever when I was 10. Father died in 68, heart just gave out one day." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Seems we're both orphans now." The word struck Zach forcefully. He'd never thought of himself as an orphan. He'd been a grown man when his father died. But Lorelai was right. They were both alone in the world now. "What about you?" he asked, changing the subject. "How did you end up on a homestead in Colorado?" Her face softened with memories. "Father was always chasing the next opportunity. After Mother died of cholera, he couldn't bear to stay in Missouri. We moved west when I was 15. Tried mining in Montana, ranching in Wyoming, finally settled on homesteading here 3 years ago." "You've seen a lot of country for someone so young," Zach observed. She laughed softly. "I'm hardly young. 23 and unmarried, practically a spinster by most standards." "That's ridiculous," Zach said without thinking. He caught himself, suddenly aware of how forward he was being. "I'm what?" she prompted, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Beautiful," he finished honestly. "And strong. And probably too good for most of the men who have come calling." A blush rose in her cheeks. "That's very kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, just the truth." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Zach felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, that this was more than a chance encounter, more than one person helping another in need. The moment was broken when Doc Wilson entered with a tray of food. "Lunchtime," he announced, "and then Miss Evans needs to rest." Zach stood reluctantly. "I should go anyway. I want to ride out to the Miller Ranch, see about that job. Will you come back tomorrow?" Lorelai asked, not quite hiding the eagerness in her voice. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised. Clarence Miller turned out to be a gruff man in his 60s with a weathered face and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. He listened to Zach's experience with cattle, asked a few pointed questions about his skills with horses, then offered him a job on the spot. "Pays fair," Miller said. "30 a month plus room and board. Season runs through October, then I keep on a skeleton crew for the winter." "I'll take it," Zach agreed, shaking the rancher's hand. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning. Bunkhouse is behind the main house. Cook'll feed you breakfast at sunrise. Zach spent the rest of the day gathering supplies he'd need for ranch work: new work gloves, a few extra shirts, ammunition for his revolver. By the time he returned to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house for dinner, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He paid her for another week, explaining that he'd be moving to the Miller Ranch the following day. "But I'll be in town often," he added. "Might need the room again from time to time." Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly. "Checking on Miss Evans, I expect." News traveled fast in a small town like Lavetta. Zach didn't bother denying it. "Yes, madam." "Good for you," she said approvingly. "That girl's been through enough. Needs someone looking out for her." The next morning, Zach rose before dawn, packed his few possessions, and left a note for Mrs. Patterson thanking her for her hospitality. He stopped by Doc Wilson's office, but it was too early for visitors, so he left a message with the doctor's assistant explaining where he would be. Life at the Miller Ranch quickly settled into a familiar routine. The work was hard but satisfying: mending fences, checking on cattle, breaking horses for the upcoming drive. Zach had always been good with horses, and Miller soon put him in charge of training the new stock. Every few days, Zach would ride into Lavetta to check on Lorelai. Each visit found her a little stronger, a little more like the woman she must have been before the tragedy. Doc Wilson finally allowed her to sit on the porch of his office, where she would wait for Zach's visits, her face lighting up when she saw him riding down the street. 2 weeks after the raid, Sheriff Wyatt stopped by the Miller Ranch to speak with Zach. They sat on the porch of the main house, sharing coffee as the sun set behind the mountains. "Trial's set for next month," Wyatt informed him. "Judge Phillips will be coming from Pueblo. You'll need to testify about finding Miss Evans and the homestead." Zach nodded. "I'll be there." "How is she holding up?" "Strong woman," Wyatt said admiringly. "Gave a full statement yesterday. Identified all 3 raiders without hesitation." He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Doc Wilson says she's well enough to leave his care, but she's got nowhere to go." "I know," Zach replied. It was a problem that had been weighing on him. No family to take her in. None that we know of. She could stay at Mrs. Patterson's, but that's temporary at best. She needs something permanent. Zach stared into his coffee cup, an idea forming. What about the homestead land? Does she still own that? Legal title passed to her when her father died, yes. But the house is gone and she'd have no way to rebuild on her own. What if she had help? Wyatt gave him a shrewd look. "You offering to rebuild her house, Blackett?" "Maybe," Zach admitted. "If she wanted that." The sheriff nodded slowly. "You've taken quite an interest in Miss Evans." "I have," Zach said simply, seeing no point in denying it. "Known her, 3 weeks now." "Sometimes you don't need a lifetime to know what matters," Zach replied. Wyatt chuckled. "Can't argue with that. My Eliza and I courted for all of 2 weeks before I proposed. Been married 26 years now." The word "courted" gave Zach pause. Was that what he was doing with Lorelai? Their relationship had begun in such unusual circumstances, he hadn't thought to put a name to it. But he couldn't deny that his feelings for her had grown far beyond mere concern or obligation. "Talk to her," Wyatt advised, setting down his empty cup. "See what she wants." The next day, Zach rode into town with a purpose. He found Lorelai sitting on Doc Wilson's porch, a book open in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. The sight of her made his heart skip a beat. "Zachariah," she greeted him with a smile. "You're early today." "Asked Miller for the morning off," he explained, taking the chair beside her. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day," she said. "Doc Wilson says I can leave his care next week." Zach nodded, gathering his courage. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Have you thought about what you'll do next? Her smile faded. It's all I think about. Mrs. Patterson has offered me a room, but I can't impose on her charity forever. I need to find work, but, he prompted gently. But most opportunities for a woman in my position are limited. She closed her book, setting it aside. I can sew, but not well enough to make a living at it. I can cook, but Lavetta already has a restaurant and a bakery. What about the homestead land? Pain flickered across her face. I can't go back there, not yet, and even if I could, what would I do? I can't rebuild alone. You wouldn't have to, Zach said, the words coming out in a rush. I could help you. We could rebuild. She stared at him, confusion evident in her expression. Why would you do that? Zach took a deep breath. Because I care about you, Lorelai, more than I expected to, more than makes sense given how short a time we've known each other. Her eyes widened. Zachariah. I'm not asking for anything, he hurried to add. I just want to help you get back on your feet. The land is yours. If you want to rebuild, I'll help you. If you want to sell it and start fresh somewhere else, I'll help with that too. Tears welled in her eyes. No one's ever. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, he assured her, reaching for her hand. Just think about it. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. She squeezed his hand, tears spilling onto her cheeks. What did I do to deserve someone like you walking into my life? You survived, he said simply. When most would have given up, you kept fighting. That kind of strength. It's rare, Lorelai, and precious. She wiped away her tears with her free hand. I need time to think. Take all the time you need, he assured her. I'm not going anywhere. For the next week, Zach threw himself into his work at the Miller Ranch, giving Lorelai the space she needed to make her decision. He didn't visit town, though it cost him to stay away. This was too important a choice to influence with his presence. On the 7th day, a rider came to the ranch asking for Zach. It was Luke Reed from the livery. Miss Evans sent me, Luke explained. Says she'd like to see you when you have time. Zach's heart raced. Tell her I'll be there this afternoon. Luke grinned. Figured you'd say that. She's not at the doctor's anymore. Moved to Mrs. Patterson's 2 days ago, room at the top of the stairs. Zach thanked the man, then went to find Miller to ask for the afternoon off. The rancher waved him away with a knowing smile. Go on, been expecting this. Expecting what? Zach asked, confused. Miller chuckled. Boy, the whole town knows you're sweet on the Evans girl. About time you did something about it. Zach opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. There was no point denying what was apparently obvious to everyone but him. He rode to town with butterflies in his stomach, feeling like a schoolboy rather than a grown man of 30. Mrs. Patterson directed him upstairs with a wink that did nothing to calm his nerves. He knocked on Lorelai's door, his hat in his hand. She opened it immediately, as if she'd been waiting just on the other side. She looked beautiful in a simple green dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Zachariah, she said, a smile lighting her face. Come in. The room was small but neat, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. Lorelai sat on the edge of the bed, gesturing for him to take the chair. You wanted to see me, he prompted when she remained silent. She nodded, her hands folded in her lap. I've been thinking about your offer to help me rebuild. And, he asked, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice, and I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express. She looked up, meeting his eyes. But I can't accept. The words hit him like a physical blow. I see, he managed, struggling to hide his disappointment. You want to sell the land then? No, she said softly. I want to rebuild, but not with you as my benefactor. Confusion replaced disappointment. I don't understand. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. These past weeks, since you found me, I've felt something growing between us. Something I never expected to find, especially not in the midst of such tragedy. Hope flickered in Zach's chest. "I've felt it too." "I know," she said with a small smile. "Everyone knows, apparently, Mrs. Patterson hasn't stopped hinting since I moved in." Despite his anxiety, Zach found himself laughing. "Miller's been the same, said the whole town knows I'm sweet on you." "Are you?" she asked, suddenly serious. "Sweet on me?" "Lorelai," he said, moving from the chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "I'm far past sweet. I'm halfway to forever with you." Tears filled her eyes, but she was smiling. "That's why I can't accept your help as a friend or a benefactor. If we're going to rebuild, I want us to do it together, as partners, as husband and wife," he finished for her, scarcely believing his ears. She nodded, a blush staining her cheeks. "Is that too forward? Too soon?" "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel like I've known you all my life." Zach's heart soared. "Not too forward, not too soon, just perfect." He squeezed her hands gently. "Lorelai Evans, will you marry me?" Her laugh was like music. "That was supposed to be my proposal, Zachariah Blackett." "Is that a yes?" In answer, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "That's definitely a yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Lavetta. The entire town turned out for the ceremony. It wasn't every day that a love story born from tragedy unfolded before their eyes. Sheriff Wyatt gave the bride away. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears throughout the service, and Clarence Miller stood as Zach's best man. After the ceremony, they rode out to the homestead land together. It was the first time Lorelai had returned since the night of the fire. She was quiet as they approached, her hand tight in Zach's. The ruins of the house had been cleared away by volunteers from town, leaving only the stone chimney standing like a sentinel over the empty land. Spring had brought new-growth green grass pushing through the blackened earth, wildflowers dotting the meadow. "Are you all right?" Zach asked as they dismounted. Lorelai nodded, her eyes fixed on the place where her home had stood. "It's strange. I expected to feel only sadness, but there's hope here too." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "I can see it, our home, rising from these ashes." Zach pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by her strength, her resilience. "It will be beautiful," he promised. "Everything you dreamed." "It already is," she said, looking up at him, "because you're here." They began rebuilding the next day. Miller gave Zach time off from the ranch, and men from town came to help raise the walls of the new house. Lorelai worked alongside them, her strength returning a little more each day. By midsummer, the house was completed, a sturdy structure with 4 rooms and a wide porch. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, built to withstand the harsh Colorado winters and to grow with them as their family grew. On the day they moved in, Zach carried Lorelai across the threshold, both of them laughing with the sheer joy of it. They had simple furniture donated by townspeople, a few precious items that had been stored in the barn and survived the fire, and each other. That night, as they lay in their new bed, Lorelai turned to Zach, her eyes shining in the moonlight that streamed through the window. "Do you remember what you said to me that night, when you found me crawling from the fire?" "I said a lot of things," Zach replied, stroking her hair. "You said you're alive, that's what matters." She traced his face with gentle fingers. "I didn't understand then what you meant. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. And now," he prompted softly. "Now I understand," she said. "Being alive means having the chance to find love again, to build something new from the ashes of the old." She kissed him tenderly. "You saved more than my life that night, Zachariah. You saved my hope." "You saved me too," he admitted. "I was just drifting, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. You gave me a home, Lorelai, a place to belong." As summer turned to autumn and autumn to winter, the Blackett homestead thrived. Zach continued working at the Miller Ranch, earning enough to buy cattle of their own. Lorelai planted a garden and began selling preserves and baked goods in town, quickly developing a reputation for the best apple pie in the county. The raiders were tried and convicted, sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. Lorelai testified at the trial, her voice never wavering as she identified the men who had killed her father and destroyed her home. Zach had never been prouder of her than he was that day, watching her face her past with such courage. Spring brought new life to the land and to the Blacketts. Lorelai's belly grew round with their first child, a development that filled Zach with equal parts terror and joy. The past seemed to have loosened its grip on them. Both Lorelai could now speak of her father with more fondness than pain, and the nightmares that had plagued her in the early months had faded. Their son was born on a clear May morning in 1879, a robust boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Joseph, after Lorelai's father, and Zach found himself whispering the same words to his newborn son that he had said to Lorelai on that fateful night. "You're alive. That's what matters." By their first wedding anniversary, the Blackett homestead had expanded to include a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden that was the envy of the county, and a reputation as one of the most hospitable homes in the area. Travelers passing through La Veta often found themselves directed to the Blackett place for a hot meal and good company. On the evening of their anniversary, Zach and Lorelai sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Little Joseph slept peacefully in his cradle beside them, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "Happy?" Zach asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Lorelai leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe how our story began with fire and loss and pain. But that's not how it ends," Zach reminded her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Our story ends with love and family and home." "Not ends," Lorelai corrected him, taking his hand and placing it over her heart. "Continues. Every day with each sunrise our story continues." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two souls who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and forged something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The path ahead would not always be easy. Life in the Colorado Territory demanded resilience and strength, but they would face it together, remembering always that being alive, being together, was what truly mattered. 5 years passed, bringing with them both joy and challenge. The Blackett homestead flourished, expanding to include not only cattle, but also a small horse breeding operation that gained reputation throughout the territory. Zach had a natural gift with horses, and his carefully bred stock became sought after for their strength and intelligence. Lorelai's preserves and baked goods had become so popular that she opened a small shop in La Veta, hiring 2 local girls to help her run it while she divided her time between the business and the homestead. The shop, which she named Evans Pantry in memory of her father, quickly became a gathering place for the women of the town. Their family grew as well. Little Joseph, now 5, was a sturdy boy with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's quick mind. He was joined by a sister, Emma, who at 3 was already showing signs of having inherited her mother's determination and her father's way with animals. The newest addition, baby Thomas, was just 6 months old, a placid infant with a ready smile. The winter of 1883 was unusually harsh, with blizzards sweeping down from the mountains and temperatures falling to record lows. The Blacketts weathered it well, their home snug and warm, their pantry well-stocked from Lorelai's abundant garden. They took in 2 stranded travelers during the worst of the storms, making room by the fire and sharing what they had, just as they always did. It was during one such blizzard that Zach found Lorelai standing at the window, watching the snow swirl in the lamplight, her expression thoughtful. He slipped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he murmured against her hair. She turned in his embrace, her eyes reflecting the golden lamplight. "I was thinking about how different things might have been if you hadn't come along that night," she admitted. "If I had died in that fire, or if you had ridden past without stopping." "I couldn't have ridden past," Zach said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Lorelai. I believe that now more than ever." She smiled, touching his face with gentle fingers. "Do you know what today is?" Zach mentally calculated, momentarily confused. It wasn't their anniversary or any of the children's birthdays. "Should I know?" "It's exactly 5 years since the night of the fire," she said softly. 5 years since you found me crawling from the ashes and told me that being alive was what mattered." Zach tightened his arms around her. "I had no idea it was today. I almost didn't realize it myself," she admitted. "That's what made me stop and think. 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine ever forgetting the date of the worst night of my life. Now, it nearly slipped by unnoticed." She smiled up at him. "That's how I know I've truly healed, Zachariah. When the worst day of my life is just another day on the calendar." He kissed her then, overwhelmed by her wisdom, her grace, her ability to find meaning in even the darkest experiences. "You are remarkable, Lorelai Blackett," he murmured against her lips. "We are remarkable," she corrected him, her arms winding around his neck. "Together." As spring thawed the frozen land, bringing new growth and activity to the homestead, Zach often found himself marveling at the life they had built. The lonely cowboy he had been always moving, never connecting, seemed like a stranger now. This life, with its deep roots and meaningful connections, had transformed him in ways he was still discovering. One warm afternoon in May, as he worked with a young colt in the corral, Sheriff Wyatt rode up to the homestead. The lawman was older now, his hair more gray than black, but he sat his horse with the same straight-backed authority he always had. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Zach greeted him, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached the fence. "What brings you out this way?" Wyatt dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. "Official business, I'm afraid," he said, his expression grave. "Is Lorelai around? You both need to hear this." A cold knot formed in Zach's stomach. "She's in the garden with the children. I'll get her." He found Lorelai kneeling in the vegetable garden, Joseph and Emma helping her plant peas while baby Thomas napped in a basket nearby. The sight of them, peaceful and content in the afternoon sunlight, made the sheriff's serious demeanor all the more concerning. "Sheriff Wyatt's here," he told her quietly. "Says he has something to tell us both." Lorelai looked up, alarm flashing briefly across her face before she composed herself. "Children, stay here and finish planting the row," she instructed. "I'll be back shortly." They walked back to where Wyatt waited, Lorelai's hand finding Zach's, their fingers intertwining in the instinctive way they had whenever one sensed the other's unease. "Sheriff," Lorelai greeted him. "What brings you all the way out here?" Wyatt removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I received a telegram from the warden at the territorial prison yesterday. I wanted to bring the news myself, rather than have you hear it in town." The knot in Zach's stomach tightened. "What news?" "The men who attacked your homestead killed your father," Wyatt said, addressing Lorelai directly. "There was a riot at the prison 3 days ago. 2 of them were killed." Lorelai's hand tightened on Zach's. And the third, the leader, wounded, but he'll live, Wyatt replied, though he'll spend the rest of his sentence in solitary confinement. A complex mix of emotions crossed Lorelai's face: shock, relief, a hint of something darker that might have been satisfaction. "I see," she said finally. "Thank you for coming to tell us personally." Wyatt nodded, replacing his hat. "Thought you deserved to know. Some might say justice has been served." After the sheriff had gone, Lorelai stood for a long time looking out over their land, her expression unreadable. Zach waited beside her, giving her the space to process the news. "Do you think it's justice?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. "That they died in prison rather than living out their sentences?" Zach considered the question carefully. "I think justice is a complicated thing," he replied. "Those men made their choices. They lived by violence and they died by it. But the real justice—" He gestured to the homestead around them, the thriving garden, the corral of fine horses, the house with smoke rising from its chimney, the children's laughter carrying on the breeze. "The real justice is this: that they failed to destroy you to take your future. That you're here, building something beautiful while they spent their last years behind bars." Lorelai turned to him, tears shining in her eyes but a smile on her lips. "You're right," she said. "This is the true justice. Living well, loving deeply, that's the best revenge against those who tried to take everything from me." She took his hand, leading him back toward the garden where their children waited. "Come on," she said. "Those peas won't plant themselves, and I promised the children a story after dinner." "What story?" Zach asked, falling into step beside her. Lorelai's smile was radiant in the afternoon sunlight. "I thought I might tell them how their father once found a woman crawling from a fire and how he said 6 words that changed her life forever." "You're alive," Zach recalled softly. "That's what matters." "That's what matters," she echoed, squeezing his hand. "That's what always matters." As they rejoined their children in the garden, the past receding like a tide going out, Zach knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true purpose in life. Not in the endless wandering of his youth, but here in this place with this woman, building a legacy of love and resilience that would endure long after they were gone. The years continued to pass, each one adding new threads to the rich tapestry of their life together. The Blackett homestead became known throughout the county as a place of prosperity and generosity, a testament to what could be achieved through hard work, determination, and love. By 1888, their family had grown to include a 4th child, a daughter named Sarah, whose arrival had nearly cost Lorelai her life during a difficult birth. Zach had spent 3 terrifying days pacing outside the bedroom door while Doc Wilson fought to save both mother and child. When the doctor had finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, to announce that both had survived, Zach had wept unashamedly, overcome with gratitude. That experience had changed them both. Lorelai, always aware of how precarious life could be, embraced each day with renewed appreciation. Zach, faced with the prospect of losing her, had developed a deeper understanding of what he had told her that first night, that being alive was truly what mattered most. Their children grew strong and capable under their guidance. Joseph, now 10, showed promise as a horseman, already able to gentle the most skittish colts with an instinct that matched his father's. Emma, at 8, had her mother's head for business and could often be found helping in the shop in town, charming customers with her quick wit. Thomas, 5, was quieter than his siblings, with a natural affinity for drawing and observing the world around him. And little Sarah, just 2, toddled after them all, determined not to be left behind. The community around them had grown as well. Lavetta had expanded, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Colorado had achieved statehood in 1876, bringing changes in governance and increased connection to the wider nation. The railroad had reached nearby Walsenburg, making travel easier and bringing more visitors to the region. Through all these changes, the bond between Zach and Lorelai remained unshakable, a partnership forged in fire and tempered by the challenges they had faced together. They were no longer the young, wounded souls who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy. They had matured, deepened, grown into the fullness of who they were meant to be, both individually and as a couple. On a golden autumn evening in 1888, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and crimson, Lorelai rested her head against Zach's shoulder, a familiar gesture that still sent warmth spreading through his chest. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "about all the little choices that led us here? All the turns in the road that brought you to that valley on that particular night?" Zach considered the question, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think about how I almost took the northern route to Denver, how I almost didn't stop when I saw the fire." "But you did stop," she said. "You found me." "And you found me right back," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Maybe we were always meant to find each other. Maybe all those choices weren't really choices at all, but destiny guiding us to where we needed to be." Lorelai smiled, watching as their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "I like that thought," she said. "That even in our darkest moments, we were being led toward the light." As twilight deepened into night and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about the past they had shared and the future that still lay ahead. The children eventually tired of their games and came to join them, little Sarah climbing into her father's lap while the older ones sat at their feet, eager for one of the stories that had become a family tradition. "Tell us about the night you met Mama," Joseph requested, though he had heard the story countless times before. Zach exchanged a smile with Lorelai, then began the familiar tale. "It was a spring night, much like this one, though not as peaceful. I was making camp in a valley not far from here when I heard gunshots and saw flames against the night sky." As he recounted the story of that fateful night, Zach watched the faces of his children, illuminated by the warm glow of the porch lantern. They listened with rapt attention, even though they knew every word by heart. To them, it was more than just a story, it was the beginning of their family, the foundation upon which their lives were built. When he reached the part where he had found Lorelai crawling from the flames, Sarah piped up with the words she had memorized. "You said, 'You're alive, that's what matters,'" she recited proudly. "That's right," Zach confirmed, ruffling her hair affectionately. "And it was true then, and it's true now. Being alive, being together, that's what matters most." Later, after the children had been tucked into bed and the house had grown quiet, Zach and Lorelai stood by their bedroom window, looking out at the starlit landscape of their homestead. 10 years had passed since that night of fire and rescue, 10 years of building and growing and loving. "Thank you," Lorelai said suddenly, turning to face him. "For what?" Zach asked, puzzled by the intensity in her eyes. "For everything," she replied simply. "For saving me that night. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For helping me rebuild not just a house, but a life." She placed her hand over his heart, a gesture that had become a symbol of their connection over the years. "For giving me these children, this home, this love that I never thought I would find." Zach covered her hand with his own, overwhelmed as always by the depth of what they shared. "You don't need to thank me, Lorelai. Everything I have, everything I am, is better because of you." They stood together in the starlight, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built a life filled with light. Their story, which had begun with fire and loss, had transformed into one of resilience and hope, a testament to the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Outside their window, the Colorado night stretched vast and beautiful, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting now shining down on the life they had created together. And in that moment, as they had countless times before, they both knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. 10 more years passed, bringing the Blacketts into a new century. The year 1900 dawned with celebration and reflection, as the family gathered to mark not only the turn of the century, but also 22 years since Zach and Lorelai had found each other on that fateful night. Their homestead had grown into a prosperous ranch, with Blackett horses now sought after throughout Colorado and beyond. Lorelai's shop in Lavetta had expanded, selling not only her famous preserves and baked goods, but also household items and fabrics brought in by the railroad. Their partnership, in business as in life, remained the solid foundation upon which everything else was built. The children were nearly grown now. Joseph, at 20, had recently married his childhood sweetheart, a sweet-natured girl named Mary from a neighboring ranch. They lived in a small house Zach and Joseph had built on the eastern edge of the Blackett property, continuing the family legacy. Emma, at 18, showed no interest in marriage, instead focusing on her studies with an eye toward attending college in Denver, a plan her parents supported wholeheartedly. Thomas, 15, had developed his childhood interest in drawing into genuine artistic talent, his sketches of the Colorado landscape attracting attention even beyond Lavetta. And Sarah, now 12, was the image of her mother at the same age, with the same determination and quick mind. Life had not been without its challenges. They had weathered droughts that threatened their crops, blizzards that claimed some of their livestock, and a fire, ironically, that had damaged part of Lorelai's shop in town. But each challenge had only served to strengthen their bond, reinforcing what they had learned that first night, that as long as they were alive, as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything. On a crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods that now lined the drive to their home, Zach sat with Lorelai on the wide porch that had hosted so many family gatherings over the years. They were alone for once, the children scattered to their various activities, Joseph and Mary at their own home, Emma at a friend's in town, Thomas sketching by the creek, and Sarah at a neighbor's for a quilting lesson. "Remember when we first built this porch?" Lorelai asked, her hand resting comfortably in Zach's. "How we sat here that first night in mismatched chairs, drinking coffee and planning all the things we would do with the place." Zach smiled at the memory. "You had such grand visions. I remember thinking they seemed impossible at the time." "And now look," she said, gesturing to the thriving ranch that surrounded them. "We've accomplished everything we dreamed of and more." "Not everything," Zach corrected her gently. "You always talked about seeing more of the world someday. Remember how you wanted to visit San Francisco, see the ocean?" Lorelai's eyes lit up with remembered longing. "I did want that, didn't I? It seemed so impossible then, with a new home to build and barely enough money to buy seed for the garden." "It's not impossible now," Zach said, an idea taking shape as he spoke. "Joseph and Mary can look after the ranch. Emma's planning to stay in town with Mrs. Patterson while she prepares for college. Thomas and Sarah are old enough to manage without us for a while." She turned to him, surprise and excitement dawning on her face. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I am," he confirmed, warming to the idea himself. "Let's do it, Lorelai. Let's take that trip we always talked about. San Francisco, the ocean, all of it." "When?" She asked, her voice breathless with possibility. Why not this spring, after the winter breaks and before the summer heat? Lorelai laughed, the sound as joyful and clear as it had been when he first fell in love with her. You're serious. Absolutely serious, he affirmed, bringing her hand to his lips. We've spent 22 years building this life, raising our children, putting down roots. Maybe it's time we spread our wings a little. Zachariah Blackett, she said, shaking her head in wonder. Just when I think I know everything about you, you still manage to surprise me. Good, he replied with a smile. I plan to keep surprising you for at least another 22 years. They began planning that very night. Maps spread across the kitchen table as they traced the route they would take west through Utah, Nevada, and finally to California. They would travel by train where possible, by stagecoach where necessary, staying in hotels along the way, a far cry from their early days of careful budgeting and simple living. The children reacted to the news with varying degrees of surprise and enthusiasm. Joseph, now a responsible young rancher himself, offered immediately to oversee the entire operation in their absence. Emma was delighted, especially when Lorelai suggested she might join them in San Francisco at the end of the journey to visit potential colleges. Thomas worried about who would manage the horse breeding program, relaxing only when Zach assured him that their foreman, Luis Rodriguez, was more than capable. Sarah, initially dismayed at being left behind, was placated by the promise of photographs and souvenirs from every stop along the way. As spring approached, the entire community became invested in the Blackett's grand adventure. Neighbors offered advice on what to pack, where to stay, what to see. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s but still running the boarding house, presented Lorelai with a beautiful new traveling dress she had ordered specially from Denver. You'll be representing La Veta out there in the big world, the older woman declared. Need to look your best. The journey itself exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. They departed in April 1900, boarding the train at Walsenburg with their community gathered to see them off. As the train pulled away from the station, Lorelai squeezed Zach's hand, her eyes bright with excitement. I can hardly believe we're doing this, she said. After all these years, we're finally seeing more of the world. Together, Zach added, the word that had defined their life since that first night. They traveled west through landscapes. Neither had ever seen the red rock formations of Utah, the vast deserts of Nevada, and finally, the breathtaking expanse of the Pacific Ocean that had figured in Lorelai's dreams for so many years. Standing on the beach near San Francisco, watching the waves crash against the shore, Lorelai's face reflected a wonder that made Zach fall in love with her all over again. She removed her shoes, hiking up her skirts to wade into the surf, laughing like a young girl as the cold water swirled around her ankles. It's even more magnificent than I imagined, she called to him, her hair coming loose from its pins in the ocean breeze. Zach joined her at the water's edge, marveling not just at the vastness of the ocean, but at the journey that had brought them here from a burning homestead in Colorado, this shining shore thousands of miles away. Was it worth the wait? He asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Yes, she said without hesitation, because I'm sharing it with you. They spent 3 weeks in San Francisco, exploring the bustling city, dining in fine restaurants, attending the theater, and simply absorbing the energy of a place so different from their quiet Colorado home. Emma joined them for the final week, her enthusiasm for the city confirming her decision to continue her education far from home. As they prepared to return to Colorado, Lorelai stood at the window of their hotel room, looking out at the city lights. "I've loved every moment of this journey," she said thoughtfully. "Seeing new places, experiencing different ways of life." "But," Zach prompted, sensing there was more to her reflection. She turned to him with a smile. "But I'm ready to go home, to our land, our family, our life together." Zach crossed the room to stand beside her, pulling her gently into his arms. "I feel the same way. This has been a wonderful adventure, but our real adventure is the life we've built together," she finished for him. They returned to La Veta in late May, greeted by their children and neighbors with celebration and welcome. The homestead looked more beautiful than ever, the spring planting completed, the new foals frolicking in the pasture, the apple trees in full bloom. That evening, as they sat on their familiar porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Lorelai rested her head on Zach's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about that night again, the night you found me." "What about it?" Zach asked, his arm around her shoulders. "You told me that being alive was what mattered," she recalled. "And you were right. But over the years, I've come to realize that it's not just about being alive. It's about how you live, the choices you make, the love you give, the legacy you create." Zach considered her words, looking out over the land they had transformed together, land that had once been scarred by fire but now flourished with new life. "I think you're right," he agreed. "Though I'd add one thing." "What's that?" "It's also about who you live for," he said softly. "Finding someone worth building a life with, worth facing all the challenges for." He turned to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm grateful every day that I found you, Lorelai, that we found each other." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his in the intimate gesture that had become theirs over the decades. "As am I," she whispered. "Every single day." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their journey, about their children, about the years that stretched behind them and the years that still lay ahead. Their story, which had begun in fire and desperation, had transformed into one of enduring love and profound gratitude, a testament to the human capacity for resilience, for growth, for finding beauty even in the aftermath of destruction. And though neither could know what the future might hold, they faced it as they had faced everything else since that fateful night together, with courage and faith in each other, knowing that as long as they had that, they had everything that truly mattered.